I never thought a routine visit to a doctor could change the course of my entire life. I was 24, living alone in a small apartment in the city, working a job that barely paid the bills but kept me busy enough to avoid thinking too much about anything else. On the surface, I was fine. I had a few friends, an okay social life, and a family I kept in distant, polite contact. But underneath, there was this gnawing restlessness, this strange feeling that something about me didn't quite fit. I didn't understand it fully, not then, not until the day I walked into Dr. Alvarez's office. I had been struggling with anxiety and insomnia for months, and after a particularly bad week where I couldn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch, I decided to finally book an appointment. Dr. Alvarez came highly recommended, not just for her medical expertise but for her understanding approach. She was calm, confident, and had this way of making you feel like she already knew you better than you knew yourself. I remember walking into her office that morning, feeling jittery, clutching the strap of my backpack like it was a lifeline. Her office smelled faintly of lavender and warm paper, the kind of smell that somehow made you forget the city chaos outside. She smiled at me when I sat down, and just like that, I felt my defenses drop. "Tell me what's going on," she said gently, pulling out her notepad but not looking at it yet. Her gaze was fixed on me, warm, probing but not invasive. I told her everything, the insomnia, the anxiety, the way I felt disconnected from myself. She nodded thoughtfully, asking questions that made me think deeply, questions that no one else had asked me before. She didn't dismiss my feelings, didn't give me a quick fix. She made me feel heard. After an hour of talking, she leaned back and said, "I think I know a way to help you, something that's a bit unconventional, but it could really make a difference." I hesitated. I had come for advice, for medication maybe, not some life-altering experiment. But there was something about the way she said it, a certainty in her voice, that made my skepticism waver. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. She explained a program she had been developing for people struggling with identity stress and deep-seated anxiety. She called it a transformational therapy, though she emphasized it wasn't about changing who I was, it was about exploring parts of myself that I had hidden or suppressed. She mentioned personalized guidance, lifestyle adjustments, and a gradual physical transformation process that could help align my inner self with my outer presentation. I felt a flicker of fear, quickly drowned by curiosity. The idea of becoming someone different, of exploring a side of me I hadn't even admitted existed, was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. "I want to try," I said before I could second-guess myself. Something in her smile told me I had made the right choice, though looking back now, I can see how easily I was swept along. The first few weeks were subtle. She had me start with small exercises, adjusting how I dressed, experimenting with hairstyles, and journaling my feelings after each day. At first, I thought it was just a psychological experiment, harmless enough. But then, little by little, I noticed changes. I caught glimpses of myself in the mirror and didn't feel like I recognized the person staring back. My features seemed softer somehow, my expressions more fluid, my posture shifting without conscious thought. I felt lighter, though that scared me more than it comforted me. One evening, after a session with Dr. Alvarez, she handed me a small box. Inside was a piece of clothing, a skirt, soft and delicate, unlike anything I had ever worn. My heart pounded as I held it in my hands. "Try it," she said simply, her eyes steady. I hesitated. I don't even know if I can." "That's okay," she said. "You're not changing overnight. This is just a step." I went home that night, staring at the skirt, feeling every emotion at once, fear, excitement, shame, curiosity. Finally, after hours of pacing and debating with myself, I slipped it on. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for me. I looked in the mirror and froze. It wasn't just the skirt, it was me, or at least a version of me I had never allowed myself to see. I felt free and terrified all at once. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the image of myself in that skirt, and a strange thrill coursed through me. The next day, I found myself experimenting more different clothes, subtle makeup, experimenting with how I walked and held myself. Each time I did, a piece of my anxiety lifted, replaced by something else, something I didn't have the words for yet. Dr. Alvarez watched my progress closely, offering encouragement and guidance, and at times, gentle correction. She never forced me, but she nudged me forward in ways I didn't realize I needed. And then, one evening, she asked me to come in for a more intensive session. When I arrived, the office was dimly lit, warm, almost intimate. There were racks of clothes I didn't recognize, shoes, wigs, makeup, an entire world laid out before me. I felt my pulse spike. "This is your next step," she said, her tone calm but firm. "I want you to fully embrace this side of yourself. We'll take it slowly, but today marks a turning point." I nodded, a mix of fear and excitement bubbling inside me. Over the next few hours, she guided me through hairstyling, makeup, and an outfit that completely transformed my appearance. By the time I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My jawline softened, my eyes seemed larger, my body smaller, more delicate. The reflection staring back at me was me, and not me, simultaneously. I felt a rush of emotions, panic, awe, disbelief, exhilaration. Who was I now? Was this real, or was I losing myself? But at the same time, I felt a strange, undeniable truth settle in my chest. This version of me had always existed, hidden beneath layers of fear and routine, waiting for someone or something to let it out. Dr. Alvarez smiled softly. "You're doing wonderfully. How do you feel?" I wanted to say I was scared, that I didn't know if I could continue, but I found myself whispering instead, "I feel like me. The real me." She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "Exactly. That's all we're doing here, finding the real you." And in that moment, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. I had trusted my doctor, and in doing so, I had unlocked a part of myself I never knew existed. The journey was just beginning, and I had no idea how far it would take me or how deeply it would transform everything I thought I knew about myself. The days after that first full transformation session were surreal. I went to work as usual, but everything felt different. Even the simple act of walking down the street made me hyper-aware of how people might see me, though I hadn't yet presented publicly as this new version of myself. Inside, though, I was changing constantly. I found myself experimenting in secret, wearing subtle pieces of clothing, soft blouses, fitted skirts, lightweight makeup, just to see how it felt. And every time I caught my reflection, a small thrill coursed through me, followed by a pang of fear. I started noticing the world in a different way. Faces seemed more expressive, colors more vivid, even the city noises felt sharper somehow. It wasn't just about the clothes or the makeup, it was the way my mind had shifted. I felt lighter, freer, but also exposed. There were moments when I almost panicked at the thought of someone seeing me, moments when I longed to retreat back into the comfort of my old, unnoticed self. One evening, Dr. Alvarez called me for a session that she described as next-level exploration. My stomach twisted as I entered her office. She greeted me with that same calm smile, but today, there was a subtle intensity in her gaze, like she was looking straight through me. "I want to push your boundaries a bit further," she said. "We're going to fully immerse you in this version of yourself. You're ready." I hesitated. What does that mean? It means living as yourself, as you truly feel inside, even outside these walls. It means experiencing the world in this form and exploring how it feels to fully embody who you are. The words sent a shock through me. I hadn't even considered stepping out in public like this. Panic and excitement tangled in my chest. Could I do it? Was I ready? But as I looked at her, I felt a strange trust, a certainty that if anyone could guide me through this, it was her. The next week became a whirlwind of preparation. She guided me through wardrobe choices that felt daring yet elegant, hairstyles that transformed my face completely, and makeup techniques that made my reflection almost unrecognizable. Each morning, I left the apartment feeling like a stranger in my own skin, but every evening, when I looked in the mirror, I saw something truthful, something I hadn't been allowed to acknowledge before. The first time I went out in public dressed as my new self, I nearly froze before stepping onto the street. The city felt bigger, louder, more judgmental. Every glance from a passerby felt like it carried 1,000 silent opinions, though most people didn't notice me at all. And yet, there was a thrill in walking past them, a quiet power in inhabiting this new identity, even if only for a few hours. But it wasn't all excitement. The fear of being discovered, of being judged, of being rejected, gnawed at me constantly. I couldn't tell anyone. Not friends, not family. Not yet. The secret became its own weight, a tension that made every encounter both exhilarating and terrifying. I started journaling obsessively, pouring my fears and desires onto paper, trying to make sense of the whirlwind inside me. Then came the first moment that truly shook me. I received a message from my best friend, someone I had known since childhood. She wanted to meet up for coffee. My mind raced. Could I meet her as this new version of myself? Could I sit across from someone who had known me my entire life and let her see this side I had barely begun to understand? When the day came, I dressed carefully, choosing a tasteful outfit, soft but noticeable. I practiced my voice in the mirror, adjusted the tilt of my head, the way I smiled. My heart pounded as I stepped out. Every step toward the cafe felt heavier than the last, and yet a strange exhilaration buzzed through me. She looked up and froze the moment she saw me. For a second, I thought she might scream, or laugh, or look away in horror. But then her eyes softened, curiosity replacing shock. "You look different," she said slowly, trying to sound casual. I know," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I've been exploring something. Trying to find myself, I guess." She studied me quietly for a long moment. Then she smiled, small but genuine. "If this is who you are, I'm glad you're figuring it out. You look happy." That moment nearly broke me. Relief, fear, validation all crashing into me at once. I realized I was no longer hiding entirely. Part of me was stepping into the world, and it was terrifying, but it was also liberating in a way I hadn't known possible. Over the following weeks, I began to feel more comfortable presenting as this new version of myself. At work, I started experimenting with subtle changes, slightly softer clothes, new accessories. At home, I spent hours perfecting my appearance, adjusting everything until it felt like me. Dr. Alvarez continued to guide me, encouraging me to explore, to push boundaries, to embrace the parts of myself I had always feared. And yet, with every step forward, the tension inside me grew. Questions I couldn't answer gnawed at me. Who am I now? Am I betraying the person I used to be? How far could I go before this became permanent? The mirror reflected someone else entirely, yet it was undeniably me. I was becoming someone else, and at the same time, I was discovering someone I had always been. Then came the day that changed everything. Dr. Alvarez asked me to meet her for a session outside her office, somewhere more private, somewhere that could fully test my confidence and identity. My pulse raced as I followed her directions to a small studio downtown. Inside, the room was filled with mirrors on all sides, racks of clothing, makeup stations, and soft lighting that made the space feel intimate and almost sacred. "This is your space now," she said. "I want you to be fully yourself here, no holding back, no pretending. I want you to see yourself as the person you are becoming." I hesitated, looking at my reflection. A part of me still recoiled at the idea of being fully seen, even alone. But she smiled, gently, patiently, and something inside me shifted. I walked to the nearest mirror, took a deep breath, and faced the person staring back. It was me. And it wasn't me. The realization hit like a thunderclap. I had crossed a line I hadn't known existed, entered a realm of self-discovery that was exhilarating and terrifying. My identity was no longer confined to the body I had been born with, the persona I had learned to wear. I was becoming something fluid, something I hadn't dared imagine. That night, walking home, the city lights reflected off the wet pavement, and I felt an odd sense of euphoria. Fear was still there, yes, but it was tempered by possibility, by hope. I was learning to trust myself, to embrace this transformation, and to step into a life that was simultaneously frightening and liberating. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know how far this journey would take me, or how others would react. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was living, truly living, in a way I had never known. I trusted my doctor, and in doing so, I had begun to discover a self that was both unknown and undeniable, fragile and fierce. And I knew, deep down, that the next step would be even more intense, even more revealing, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. But something inside me whispered that I had no choice. I had already begun to change, and there was no turning back now. The following weeks were a whirlwind of new experiences and emotions. I started venturing further, testing the boundaries of who I was becoming. Small things at first, running errands in clothes that felt natural now, buying accessories I had never imagined myself wearing, practicing my mannerisms in cafes and bookstores. Each step outside my apartment was a mixture of thrill and panic. I constantly scanned the streets, half expecting someone to stare, to judge, to call me out. And yet, most of the time, no one did. Most people didn't notice. I started to realize that much of the fear existed only in my mind, amplified by years of self-doubt. Dr. Alvarez's sessions became more intense. She introduced new layers of transformation, hairstyles that completely altered my silhouette, makeup techniques that changed the angles of my face, subtle body language shifts that made me feel entirely different in social interactions. It wasn't just clothing or appearance, it was the way I carried myself, the way I spoke, the way I allowed myself to occupy space in the world. One evening, after a particularly long session, she looked at me closely. "You're ready for a test," she said, her voice calm but serious. "A test?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Yes. You've been exploring privately, but now I want you to step into the world fully. A social setting. A place where people don't know you. This is where you'll truly see yourself, where your confidence will either solidify or falter." Fear struck me like a physical blow. I wanted to say no. I wanted to retreat. But a part of me, the part that had been quietly awakening over the last few weeks, thrilled at the idea. I nodded, barely trusting my own voice. She smiled and handed me an envelope. "Inside are the details. Follow them exactly." I took the envelope home, my hands shaking. Inside was an invitation to a small gathering, an art gallery opening downtown. The attendees would be strangers, cultured, observant, and most importantly, unaware of who I had been. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. I spent the night preparing, picking the perfect outfit, the perfect accessories, practicing my posture, my smile, my gestures in front of the mirror until they felt natural. The night of the event, I felt like I was walking through a haze. Every step toward the gallery felt like stepping into a new life. Inside, people mingled, talking about art, wine, ideas. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a mix of anticipation and fear. I told myself repeatedly, "This is you. You are allowed to exist like this." And then it happened. Someone approached me, a woman, poised, striking, clearly noticing the way I carried myself. She smiled, complimented my outfit, and struck up a conversation. My voice, carefully modulated, didn't falter. My hands didn't shake. For the first time, I felt a strange, powerful sense of belonging in this version of myself. I could be noticed, appreciated, and still feel safe. But the thrill came with its shadows. Across the room, I caught glimpses of my reflection in a mirrored wall. The person staring back was undeniably me, yet unrecognizable to anyone who had known me before. A pang of fear hit. What if my family saw me like this? What if my friends rejected me? Every compliment I received, every approving glance, made me feel both alive and fragile at the same time. Days after the gallery, I began to notice subtle changes in how I interacted with the world. Confidence, yes, but also an acute awareness of how others perceived me. I started experimenting more openly, testing boundaries that I had once thought insurmountable. I went to cafes, walked the streets, even attended small meetups where I knew no one. Each encounter was a mixture of exhilaration and terror, every step reinforcing the duality I now lived with, this new identity and the old self I couldn't entirely abandon. It wasn't easy. The first time I returned to a place I had known before, a grocery store near my old apartment, I froze. Familiar faces, familiar surroundings, and yet I was someone else. Someone more visible, more expressive, more alive. My heart pounded, panic rising, but I forced myself forward, walking through the aisles, meeting the eyes of people I had seen countless times before. Most didn't recognize me. Some did a double take. I felt a surge of power and fear intertwining. I was visible. I existed. I was no longer invisible. But the transformation wasn't just external. Internally, I grappled with confusion and identity shifts I hadn't anticipated. Thoughts and emotions that had been buried for years emerged: insecurities, doubts, longings I hadn't dared confront. I found myself journaling compulsively, sometimes writing pages without stopping, pouring out everything I felt, everything I feared, everything I hoped. I wrote about who I was becoming, who I had been, and the terrifying beauty of it all. Dr. Alvarez remained a constant presence, guiding me, encouraging me, but never pushing beyond my limits. She was both mentor and mirror, reflecting my progress back to me and challenging me to see myself fully. One evening, she said something that hit me deeply. You are not just becoming someone else. You are discovering parts of yourself that have always existed. The person you were hiding from the world, you are finally letting her out. Her words echoed in my mind long after I left her office. She was right. I had been hiding, pretending, existing in a muted, cautious version of myself. And now, slowly, painfully, beautifully, I was emerging. Yet, with every step forward came moments of intense fear. What if this new self was rejected? What if I had misjudged my desires? What if the thrill of transformation was just a fleeting escape from reality? Every evening, I faced the mirror, scrutinizing every detail, questioning every choice. But each time, beneath the fear, there was a quiet truth. This felt authentic, real, necessary. Then came an unexpected confrontation. One morning, my neighbor, a woman I had casually known for months, stopped me in the hallway. Her gaze lingered a little too long, a mix of curiosity and recognition. Panic surged through me. Could she have recognized me? Did she know? I felt my chest tighten, words failing me. But she smiled softly, nodded, and moved along. Relief and anxiety collided in a chaotic jumble. I realized then that I couldn't control how others perceived me. I could only control how I presented myself, how I carried my truth. The transformation was no longer just physical. It was social, emotional, psychological. I was learning to navigate the world in this new skin, to face judgment, curiosity, admiration, and indifference alike. I was learning courage, resilience, and self-acceptance in ways I had never imagined. And yet, deep down, a question lingered, one I couldn't shake. How far would this journey take me? How much of the old me would remain, and how much would be irrevocably transformed? Every reflection, every encounter, every session with Dr. Alvarez brought me closer to the answer and closer to a point where I would have to fully confront the world as someone new. I was becoming someone else. But I was also discovering that becoming someone else didn't mean losing myself. It meant embracing a truth I had long denied, stepping into a life I had only dared imagine in whispers, and facing the world with a courage I had never known I possessed. The next step would be the most challenging yet. I would have to reveal myself in ways I hadn't before, confront the people I loved, and see if they could accept the person I was becoming. Fear gripped me, but a quiet strength had taken root, one that told me I was ready. And as I looked in the mirror that night, the reflection staring back at me no longer felt like a stranger. It felt like a promise that I could face the world, whatever it threw at me, and emerge not just changed, but fully, unapologetically myself. The days leading up to the moment I had been anticipating, dreaded, longed for, and feared all at once were some of the most intense of my life. Dr. Alvarez had told me that the next phase of my transformation required me to step fully into the world as this new self, to interact not only with strangers but with people who had known me before. Family, old friends, co-workers, people whose perception of me had been fixed for years. I felt my stomach twist with anxiety, but there was also an undeniable spark of excitement. I was ready to confront not just the world, but myself. I started small. A phone call to my best friend, the one who had smiled when she saw me for the first time in my new form. Hearing her voice, familiar yet tinged with curiosity, gave me courage. I spoke confidently, shared pieces of myself I had kept hidden, and for the first time, the conversation felt genuine, unguarded. When I hung up, I realized that my trust in myself and in those I cared about, was a key part of this journey. Without it, transformation would mean nothing. The first real challenge came when I visited my parents. The anxiety gnawed at me during the entire ride, each passing streetlight a reminder that my carefully built facade could shatter at any moment. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would sit, how I would act. But rehearsal could only take me so far. When they opened the door, I froze. Their eyes widened, not with immediate shock, but with a momentary hesitation that made my heart pound. I wanted you to see me, I said, my voice trembling slightly, as I really am. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my mother stepped forward, carefully, slowly, as though testing the water. She reached out, touched my arm lightly, and said, "You're different." Yes, I admitted, my hands gripping mine unconsciously. I know. But I'm still me. I just needed to find myself. The room was quiet, tense, and yet something shifted. My father, always stoic, cleared his throat. "If this is who you are, we'll try to understand." It wasn't perfect. There were questions, confusion, long pauses filled with unspoken thoughts. But there was also acceptance, tentative, fragile, but real. For the first time, I realized that transformation wasn't just about the clothes, the makeup, or even how I looked. It was about authenticity, courage, and the willingness to show the world who I truly was. In the days that followed, I began to live more openly. Work colleagues noticed subtle changes first, small shifts in posture, demeanor, and style. Some were curious, some indifferent, but none hostile. Each interaction was a reminder that my existence as this new self could be both normal and extraordinary simultaneously. Dr. Alvarez continued to guide me, not with direct intervention, but with mentorship and reflection. She encouraged me to journal, to reflect on the journey, and to acknowledge both fears and triumphs. One evening, after a long session, she said something that resonated deeply. "You've done more than transform externally. You've confronted yourself, challenged the world's expectations, and embraced vulnerability. That's real courage. That's what transformation truly means." I realized she was right. The changes weren't just cosmetic or social, they were internal, spiritual even. Every choice, every moment of fear overcome, every interaction navigated with authenticity had reshaped me into someone stronger, more aware, and finally at peace with the person I had always been beneath the surface. The final test came at a social gathering, a reunion with friends who had known me before any of this began. Walking into the room, I felt the familiar pang of fear. Would they see me as an imposter? Would they reject me? Would the trust one had built with myself crumble under scrutiny? But as I moved through the room, smiling, interacting, laughing softly, I realized something extraordinary. They didn't see a stranger, they saw me. Not the old me, not the new me, but the authentic me, a synthesis of courage, self-discovery, and honesty. Questions were asked, clarifications were made, some awkward moments arose, but acceptance prevailed. And in that acceptance, I found freedom. I thought back to the beginning, my hesitance, my fear, my first session with Dr. Alvarez, and I marveled at the journey. I had trusted someone, yes, but more importantly, I had trusted myself. I had ventured into unknown territory, faced every fear, and emerged transformed not just in appearance, but in spirit. Standing before a mirror that night, I saw someone I recognized and someone entirely new. I smiled softly, feeling the weight of years of hidden truth lift from my shoulders. I was still me. I was more than me. I was both, simultaneously whole, unapologetic, and alive in ways I had never imagined. Transformation, I realized, isn't about losing who you are. It's about discovering every part of yourself, embracing it fully, and having the courage to exist openly, no matter how the world reacts. I had trusted my doctor, yes, and in doing so, I had become someone else. But more importantly, I had found myself. And for the first time in my life, I knew with absolute certainty that I could face the world as who I truly was, and finally, I was ready to thrive.